Hank. Probably the most memed brawler in the game, has developed a huge fan base ever since his release. Despite this almost cult following, he has been met with one of the worst pick rates in the game, now being part of the 10 least played brawlers in the game. This is because, frankly, he is horrible in every sense of the word. Ever since his bug-filled release, Hank has been arguably the worst brawler in the game, because he was met with a multitude of nerfs. His fall-off was so hard that a brawler being killed after their release has become universally known as being hanked. I think this little shrimp deserves a bit of love from the team, as he has been left with a bit of a clunky kit and lackluster abilities. So in this video, I will be proposing a ton of reworks and rebalances to his kit to make him more functional. But before that, I want to state what my design style will be for this rework. In this rework, I want to highlight a few parts of his kit to give him some viability in the game, while also trying to give players the ability to customize his kit to their own playstyle. To do this, I leaned more into Hank as a tanky brawler, while also providing changes that would allow people to play him as an aggressive shrimp if they want. Usually in these videos, I go in the order of a brawler's base kit, and then their gadgets, star powers, mythic gear, and hypercharge. But this time I would like to start with some things I would be making part of Hank's base kit. First off, I would like to make Hank's first star power baseline. If you look at every brawler classified as a tank, so brawlers like Buzz and 8-Bit do not count, we see that every tank has a way to obtain a fast movement speed in their base kit. A brawler like Ash gets it through Rage, and Meg gets it in her small form. Right now, the only tank that doesn't is Hank, so this change will remedy that problem. The second thing I would like to add to Hank is his very own trait. I know it might be weird to not give a literal tank the tank trait, but I feel that trait is reserved for the more human-like brawlers, while brawler who either are robots, like Daryl, or control a robot like Meg did not get it. So instead, I would like to introduce a trait that I'm sure you have all heard about through other concepts. This is the heavy metal trait. Hank will be immune to all forms of knockback or pulls. I feel this is another essential change to Hank, as right now there are too many things in the game that can interrupt his charged attack. It just feels weird that a brawler in a tank can get tossed around so easily. This trait will not affect other forms of crowd control though, so Hank's main attack can still be stopped by stuns, and Hank in general can still be slowed, muted, and poisoned. The only things this affects is his matchups into brawlers that would hard counter him before, such as Shelly, Maze, El Primo, and BB. He would also have a better matchup into brawlers like Jean and Tara, as he would no longer be pullable. But now that we have his baseline effects down, I would like to move on to the rebalancing of his base kit. When looking at Hank's kit, we see that he has one of the highest healths in the game, and he has one of the most unique basic attacks, as it has a charge-up mechanic. The way this works is over 3 seconds, Hank gradually fills a balloon. That will deal more damage and have a bigger radius the more it is charged. After these 3 seconds are over, it will then remain 3 additional seconds until it pops. His balloon actually has an animation for this, as it does 1 shake on seconds 3 to 4, 2 shakes at seconds 4 to 5, and then finally pops after 3 more shakes during seconds 5 to 6. This animation is missing from his rodeo skin though. He also has a super that is more defensive overall, doing devastating damage up close but being pretty average at mid to long range. Firstly, I would like to give Hank a small HP buff from 11,600 to 12,000. This is mostly for some gadget and star power changes I make later, but also because it never sat right with me how a wrestler had more health than a literal tank. But moving on. After looking over his whole kit, I feel his main attack is his biggest weakness. Although it can ramp up to a really great amount of damage, it just gets interrupted by everything. But this is a problem that we semi-solved with the addition of his heavy metal trait. So why do I still say it is Hank's biggest problem? Well, for me, it's the range and minimum damage. For this, I decided to compare Hank to a recent brawler, who I think did the charging effect right in Angelo. And when looking at Angelo's charging effect, we can definitely see where Hank falls short. When comparing Angelo to Hank, we see that Hank has a 4 times damage multiplier, going from a minimum of 1050 damage to 4200 damage over 3 seconds. On the other hand, Angelo has a 10 times multiplier, with his damage going from 440 all the way up to 4400 over 3 seconds. The scaling is a decent trade-off that works in Hank's favor. Unlike Angelo, his attack is also an area of effect, but that is about all Hank has over Angelo. Unlike Hank, Angelo's charged shot won't expire, and it also will always go to his max range. Both of these factors mean that Angelo will rarely have to use his damage minimums, while Hank is constantly forced to buy aggro brawlers. This sort of gets rid of one of Hank's advantages. It also does not help that Hank's super that is supposed to help him against these aggro brawlers takes either 5 fully charged shots or 18 tiny shots to charge up. So, when looking at a fix to these problems, there were a lot of options that I crossed out before I landed on my idea. Firstly, I didn't want to buff his supercharge, as then he would counter close rangers brawlers too much. Not being able to be knocked back, coupled with an almost instant death super for brawlers up close, just wouldn't be fair to the other tanks and the assassins. Next, I didn't want to get rid of his water balloon popping after 6 seconds. I mean, that is literally what 2 full water balloons do, and it would eliminate some counterplay to Hank. I also don't want to add back healing when charging his bubble. The Brawl team has already said they don't plan on adding this back to his kit. One main reason being he is building up damage while charging, and a Hank could theoretically heal back up to full behind a wall while also stopping opponents from pushing up to him with the bubble. And finally, I did not want to change how Hank's balloon fills up. Again, this is something real balance do, and taking this away would make him way less unique. So what I finally decided on was changing Hank's scaling. As mentioned before, Hank's bubble goes from 1050 damage to 4200 over 3 seconds, and then is held at max damage for an additional 3 before popping. This is currently a 4 times scaling, but for my rework, I would like to change it to a 2.5 times scaling. The way this would work would be increasing his minimum damage to 1600, and decreasing his maximum damage to 4000. The next change I would make to his main attack is a bit of a nerf, but it is something that I am adding for more clarity on his damage. Since Hank had a 4 times scaling, you would assume that each quarter of the bar related to that much of an increase. But this is not true, as it seems to ramp up is always based around 42. I understand why this is the case though. They based the scaling around the 3-second timer instead. I want you guys to stick with me around this part, as the math gets a bit convoluted. Currently, Hank has to ramp up to 4 times damage in those 3 seconds. So from point A to point B, he has to increase by 3150 damage. This works out to 1050 damage gain per second. But for some reason that I don't fully understand, they decided to make the in-between segments based around 25 segments of 42. Here are numbers I was personally able to find from around an hour of testing. Even after an entire hour, I was only able to find 42 of the 75 different possibilities. I could only consistently recreate about 10 of them. This whole multiples of 42 is just too complex for the average player. So, right now, unless you are a die-hard Hank fan, you pretty much have to guess on how much damage your bubble will deal when partially charged. So for my change, I would like to make Hank's bubble fully charge at 4 seconds. The segments would also decrease significantly to only 3 per interval. Visually, this would allow players to have a clearer understanding of their damage as shown by the images on screen. With this concept, Hank would have an easy-to-understand threshold. As the player would know, they are doing around 2200 damage when a third of the bar is gone, around 2800 when the bar is 2/3 of the way gone, around 3400 when the bar finally empties, and max damage after they see the first bubble shake. Obviously, I would then add the shake effects to Hank's rodeo skin. But with this increased damage minimum, I would in turn like to nerf his supercharge a bit. Currently, it takes Hank around 18,600 damage to charge his super, with each hit from his super also charging it by 21.75%. I would like to increase the damage requirement to 2,000 hour. This is not a nerf though, as it basically means that his minimum shots would charge his super faster than before, going from 18 shots to 12.5, while his fully charged shots would remain at 5. I also would like to slightly buff his super damage from 2640 to 2700. This would change a few interactions, but I think the biggest would be his interaction with Fang. With this slight buff, Hank would be able to take out a Fang if 2 torpedoes hit him and then he auto-aims 2 attacks. Fang has always been able to feed easy hypercharges off of Hank by using his stun gadget to reset Hank's bubble and spam off kick before Hank can do any meaningful damage. This interaction change, I feel, would give Hank more of a fighting chance. But with this final change to his base kit, we can now compare him more completely to Angelo's base kit. As again, I feel Angelo did the charging mechanic best, and should have a kit that his trade-offs are Hank's. When comparing them, we see that Hank has double the HP that Angelo does. But instead, Angelo is faster and has a longer range. Angelo can move over water to stop people from interrupting his shot, while Hank's shot cannot be interrupted by knockbacks or pulls. Hank has higher minimum damage and an area of effect charged attack. But instead, Angelo's will always go maximum range, and has a charged attack that can't expire. Finally, Angelo's attack can get a poison effect while in his super, while Hank's attack will give him a speed boost when charged over 80%. After all of those changed, I feel Hank's main attack will be way more valuable in the game, while still having clear counterplay. But now that we are done with his main kit changes, let's move on to his gadgets and star powers. First, for his water balloons gadget, I actually would not change it. Even though it is the worst one of the 2 gadgets, I feel it would get an indirect buff from the changes I proposed in the Key It section. And a 3-second slow already is devastating for a gadget. So on to his second gadget, I would actually like to change up the numbers a bit. It quite literally is just Crow's Defense Booster Gadget, being a 40% shield for 3 seconds. Which I find funny that for both charged shot brawlers, they literally copy and pasted gadgets that already existed. So to add a bit more diversity to Hank, I would like to change the numbers to a 25% shield for 5 seconds. Previously, Hank would have the equivalent of 19,333 health for 3 seconds. But with this change, he would only have 16,000 but for 2 seconds longer. Next, for his star powers, I would like to add an effect duration to his Take Cover star power. Right now, he loses his shield the moment he leaves a wall. Instead, I would like to give him an effect similar to Sprout's photosynthesis star power, where he would keep this shield for 2 seconds after he left the wall. For players who are able to constantly weave in between walls with Hank, he would essentially have 3k more health. And for Hank's new star power, I give to you the Prawn Ready star power. We know Hank is strict about keeping his tank in top condition. So with this star power, he made his tank even more battle ready. His balloons would get even stronger at a minimum, with it now having a 2x scaling instead. When looking at the damage comparisons, we see that this star power would be a big change at a minimum, but no change when fully charged. While his other star power is a more defensive one to help him move in on longer ranged opponents. This one is one to help him deal with pesky tanks and assassins who get too close to Hank. Without super, here is a chart of all the interactions this would change. Know that I only included brawlers with close-range basic attacks, as you would not use an uncharged bubble on longer-ranged opponents. Moving on, I will now discuss Hank's mythic gear, hypercharge, and my proposed best builds. First off, for his mythic gear, I have the Prestige mythic gear. You know how earlier I said I did not want to add back healing to his charge at attack. This mythic gear was also one of the reasons why. With this mythic gear, every second Hank would heal for 1% of his maximum health. For Hank, this would mean 120 health healed every second. For reference, This is 40% of Rosa's star power, but it is always active. This would be a gear for Hank in modes that aren't too aggressive or passive. As in too aggressive modes, Hank would not be able to stay alive for long enough to get value out of this gear. While on the other side, he would rarely be below full HP in more passive modes. I feel like this gear would excel in more map control-based modes, such as Gem Grab and Hot Zone. Next up for his hypercharge, I struggled a bit to come up with one for his super. The two most common ones I heard were ones that would make his super literally just a spike gadget, or ones that would cause them to break walls, which Hank kinda needs to play the game. So for my concept, I came up with the Whale Torpedo's hypercharge. Hank's torpedoes would double in size and now slow down any brawler's hit for 3 seconds. For reference, his torpedoes would now be the same size as Doug Charlie's and Cord's supers. This hypercharge is a bit more simple than others I have created, but I feel it does fit into Hank's playstyle. And now on to the final part of this video. What I feel would be Hank's best builds after these changes. There are 4 builds that I feel Hank players would run, with the first one being a pure tank build. With this build, Hank would be the hardest brawler in the game to take down. He would almost always have a shield activated with passive healing from his mythic gear. If he ever got caught being at low go HP, he could also heal back up to max relatively quickly with his health gear. But in turn, his damage output would be relatively low, and if played incorrectly, would just feed his opponents super. Next is his all-arounder build. I feel this build would be his best outside of draft. As it focuses on mitigating Hank's weaknesses, this would also be his best build into assassin brawlers. Third, we have his fast-paced build. Again, I don't think Hank would be the best in fast-paced modes like Brawl, but for those who want to play him there, this build provides him a slow to keep enemies at bay, a star power to deal with the prevalence of tanks, and then both the speed and health gears to help him stay alive. And finally, we have his slow-placed build. Modes like Knockout tend to have some walls during the closing of the gas. So having his shield star power could be the difference between winning and losing a round. It is for a similar reason why he has the damage and health gears, so that if the match is dragged out, he can make a big change during the final seconds. But that is about everything I have for this video. Hank was definitely one of the hardest brawlers to do a video on so far, as his mechanics are a lot more situational compared to other brawlers. But let me know what you guys thought of this rework. If you liked, don't forget to subscribe for more reworks in the future. And thank you guys for watching.